Our next questioner is Mr. Seeback from the Conservatives.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, say welcome, as everybody else has. I'm sure you're encouraged like I am. Here in the NDP, they want to move these things through quickly, so hopefully we'll get this moved and passed in the House as quickly as possible. Sometimes you have complicated questions to ask, and sometimes you want to ask the obvious question, and sometimes those ones are just as important. So I think the answer to this is somewhat obvious, but I'm going to ask it anyway. It's with respect to the offences. I mean, do the offences apply to otherwise lawful use of nuclear or radiation material devices? And if not, why not?
No. I mean, as a matter of fact, you'll notice there are exemptions with respect to the Canadian military, and I recommend that you have a look at those. I mean, again, the lawful use of nuclear material is something that we've been aware of, accustomed to, and approve of when they're dealt with, when this material is dealt with in a proper, lawful manner. Again, what this bill again does is particularize the kind of activity that could threaten our safety and security and of Canada, but as well as indeed our partners throughout the world. And so that was why the treaties came together. It wasn't because much of this activity wasn't frowned upon, or that, but they wanted to come together to see that a clear and consistent message is being sent out throughout the world that we are cooperating with each other, we're harmonizing our laws, we're making sure that there are penalties appropriate to the kind of activity that we're talking about, and that is consistent throughout like-minded countries like our own. So while a number of countries have not yet changed their laws or brought this, have ratified this treaty, I'm optimistic that there will be more countries in the future. Again, that's the message that I have gotten back. But again, we are not waiting around for all other countries in the world, or the countries who signed on to this to ratify this. We're moving ahead at this particular time, and again, I think this is very appropriate, and I too am encouraged if this is a step towards that kind of cooperation for these sensible and important pieces of legislation that we're bringing forward to the Justice Committee. I couldn't be happier than if we get these bills through, and again, I hope this is just the first of many that will come before this committee.
Great. Minister, actually, you raised a point where I'd like to segue to next. My understanding of reviewing the legislation is that the military is going to be exempt from these proposed amendments, and you certainly alluded to that in your statement. Could you perhaps explain why that is the case?
Yeah. It, as I indicated to you, there is a military exclusionary clause. In essence, the activities of the armed forces are those terms are as understood under international law and which are governed by that law will not be by the government be reformed by the proposed criminal code. So again, the amendments don't directly apply to the activities of the Canadian Armed Forces and those acting in support of them, who are under the formal command and control of the Canadian Armed Forces while in the performance of their duties. So the military exclusion language used in both the treaties, as you will see when you examine them, is similar to that used in the International Convention for the Suppression of Terrorist Bombings, which is implemented in Canada under the Criminal Code. And so, again, that's another area that you might want to have a look at it, but I wanted to make sure that was part of the record so that you're aware of that. So, again, thank you for raising it specifically, but again, it's consistent with the language that are in those treaties and indeed other treaties.
I know that when you were doing this to be part of the 2005 agreement, do you see the legislation actually providing more security here for Canadians? Is that an important part of it as well?
I think it is, and I said in answer to one of the questions about expanding existing Canadian law in the area of extraterritoriality, the application of these to this kind of activity. I think that's important, and it's consistent with the comments that I and others have made with respect to how borderless this kind of activity has become. And so certainly it's consistent with that. And it's one of the things that we have to do. We have to consistently update our criminal laws to actually reflect what's happening out there. And as you know from your study of the criminal code, much of the time what we are doing in the criminal code, we're updating it. So we're reflecting what's happening out there, changes of technology, changes in the techniques of individuals, criminal individuals. We have to do that. And so when we bring forward bills like this that make changes, like we are proposing in here, we're being consistent with what is happening around the world and the threats that we are facing here. That this is a different world than it was 30 years ago, and indeed we are always on the lookout to make sure that our laws are as up to date as possible and reflect the threats that are actually out there.
Okay.
And as I indicated, this type of threat continues. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you, Minister.